Tá, agora está, já estamos no ar. Então eu passo a
Começo.
palavra para você, por favor, Francisco.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lavis, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on board in this initiative that's quite important for NUSCON, is the nucleus of research in public health. I am the director right now in Belo Horizonte, and I think that the picture is, I don't know if it's clear for you, but because we decided in Brazil to have a national health system 30 years ago, back in our constitution, it's so important for us that we are reaffirming right now with amidst a lot of problems that we are facing, our commitment to it, the very inclusive system that can serve everyone in the Brazilian population. And in doing this, I think it's more important to have evidence-informed policies here in Brazil. For instance, this group is discussing right now the question of vaccinations. And despite the fact that we have a lot of people vaccinating, I think that our hesitancy in Brazil is lower than other countries. I think that's quite important to have these evidences in order to allow the managers, either at municipal, state, and union level, to make their decisions about what's the way forward. So I think that this is a research that we are conducting on behalf of the municipal secretariats in Brazil, and having you with us at this moment. We are sorry that is not in person, but is a virtual conference. But anyway, it should be a pleasure to have you here. And I'd like to tell you that being Ulysses master, you are a master of mine and master of everybody here. So welcome to this meeting. I think that your advice, your presence is too important to go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. If it's okay, I'm going to share my screen, and Ulysses can tell me if it doesn't work for some reason, but hopefully it will. So Ulysses, do you see my slides?
Not yet, John.
So let me start again. Here they are. So now you should see them. Is that the case?
Yes, it's entering right now. Yes, I think so.
Great,
Thank
excellent.
you, John.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. As Francisco mentioned, we make do with virtual, but I would love to actually be there in person, and regret that I can't be, but hopefully we will be able to travel one day soon. I'm going to be talking a little bit about supporting evidence-informed policymaking. And I'm going to be using slides from the Global Commission on Evidence to address societal challenges. You'll see in the top right corner of my slides the logo for the Evidence Commission. We have been working on the Evidence Commission for 6 months. We will issue our report in 7 languages, including Portuguese, in January. But the final drafting of the text is underway right now in English and will be finished by the 10th of December. So All of our exhibits, including all of the ones that I'll walk through today, are available on our website. So if you see an exhibit of interest, you can write down the number, Google Evidence Commission, and then you'll be able to look specifically at the exhibit. So this is an overview of what I propose to cover, and I'll leave some time at the end if there are any questions or comments about what I'm speaking about. I've divided my slides into 3 groups. So one is responding to the superb work that was done in advance in summarizing the evidence about how do we improve vaccine confidence and uptake. And you'll see that I want to cover 6 points here. Then I'll move on to possible future enhancements to the evidence document, and I'll cover 3 points there. And then I hope it's not presumptuous of me, but I thought it might be helpful to talk about possible future next steps, both in terms of thinking about how the evidence document could inform a stakeholder dialogue and citizen panels. And I'll talk a little bit about our experiences with those in Canada, and also work that could be done by CONASEMS and a network of universities and think tanks to build what we call with the Evidence Commission an evidence support system. But I'll start by just commenting on the superb work that was done in bringing together the evidence about vaccine confidence and uptake. And as you'll see here, 6 points. One is, I think the team did a great job in pulling together the synthesis on a very short timeline. So I think it was done in only 30 days, and we call this a rapid evidence synthesis. Second, I think they incorporated key ways of addressing the challenge. So often with health and health system challenges, we need to think about the challenge in different ways and then look for solutions that deal with the complexity of the challenge. The third thing that I really liked about the report is how it focuses on what both professionals like doctors and citizens, so all of us, can do to support vaccine confidence and uptake. The fourth strength of the work that was done is that they relied on existing evidence syntheses. Unfortunately, very often, people reinvent the wheel and go out and look for all the primary studies on their own. But in many domains, other people have already gone out and synthesized the evidence on very focused questions. So teams like this one can look at all those different evidence syntheses, assess their quality and their applicability, in this case, to the Brazilian Unified Health System, and then present the best evidence. The fifth strength of what was done is that the team addressed all of the key questions that a municipal, state, or federal policymaker might have. So what are the benefits of the approaches? What might go wrong? What do we know about cost effectiveness, and so on? And the sixth strength was that they rated the quality of the evidence syntheses that they looked at with an accepted tool. It's specifically called the AmStar tool. So I think the rapid evidence synthesis that was prepared is superb. It ticks all of these boxes. And in my next few slides, I'll expand on these points using the exhibits from the Global Commission on Evidence to address societal challenges. So keep in mind that these are often very busy slides, lots of text, but remember, if any of them are of interest to you, just write down the exhibit number, Google Evidence Commission, and then you'll be able to open a PDF or a slide and look at it in more detail. So these are the 5 types of strategies that we see being used by evidence intermediaries around the world. In this case, the team has developed a rapid synthesis to respond to the need for evidence on a very rapid timeline. And again, I believe the team here responded in 30 days. We call this an example of facilitating pull by decision makers. So decision makers, like municipal policymakers, can ask people in the research world to give them evidence on a topic. And many units around the world have set up these types of rapid evidence services to make it easier for policymakers to reach into the world of research and pull out the evidence they need on a high priority issue. So it's an example of facilitating pull, making it easier for municipal policymakers to pull evidence into their decision-making process. A bit later, I'll come back to the final row in this table and talk about in future possibly doing one or more deliberative dialogues, including perhaps citizen panels. But for now, I'll say the team has done a great job of using one of the very effective strategies to support the use of evidence, which is rapidly synthesizing the evidence when there is an urgent need. The next slide is about different ways of addressing challenges. And in this case, what the team did was it looked at different combinations of interventions that could be applied to encourage professionals to give vaccines and to encourage citizens, including parents, to take up those vaccines. So I think of this as being about packages or bundles of interventions. The other thing that the team did was they specifically looked at the evidence to see which of these interventions were supported by best evidence. And they've highlighted the ones that have a very strong evidence behind them. So that combination is very powerful. The whole issue of how do you increase vaccine confidence and uptake is complicated. So we need to think about solutions that are similarly complex, packages of interventions, and ideally ones that are rigorously evidence-based. So again, great job on how they address challenges. This slide, the next one is about the different types of decision makers, and the Evidence Commission report speaks to all four of these: government policymakers, organizational leaders, professionals like doctors and nurses, and citizens. Now, the work that was done by the team in Brazil was responding to a request from the first type of decision maker, government policymakers, but they were looking at the evidence about how we support changes in the behavior of health professionals like doctors and of citizens. So they're working through or finding ways to work through professionals and citizens to improve outcomes, in this case, to improve vaccine uptake. But they're responding to a request from government policymakers. The next slide is about the different forms in which evidence is typically encountered in decision-making. So this is not about the different types of research we can conduct, but it's more about the types of research evidence or the forms of research evidence that decision makers often see. So nowadays, a big focus on data analytics with dashboards and other approaches to presenting analyzed data. With COVID, we've seen a lot of work about modeling. What would we expect in the future if we continue to have only moderate levels of uses of masks, if we continue to have low vaccination uptake? Evaluation is looking at things like, does this approach work in achieving our objectives? Behavioral and implementation research is about how do we change, in this case, the behaviors of professionals and citizens to encourage them to give vaccines in the case of professionals, or to agree to be vaccinated in the case of citizens. qualitative insights are also critically important. So in a lot of our work in Canada about how to improve vaccine confidence and uptake, the very rigorous evaluation studies that look at the quantitative evaluation of whether something works have often been done alongside qualitative research that have looked at how different communities respond to the idea of vaccination and why they may have concerns about vaccination. In Canada, the three groups that we are most worried about are Black and other racialized communities, Indigenous peoples, and the third are those who are homeless or precariously housed. So we have a team maintaining a living evidence document that includes the data analytics, the syntheses of the evaluations, but also the qualitative insights that give us a sense of how those three communities are thinking about vaccines and why they may be hesitant to take them up and what approaches may serve to increase vaccine uptake. The next type of or form of evidence is evidence synthesis, and the Brazilian team presented an evidence synthesis. And then we also have forms of evidence that are technology assessments and guidelines. So we think all of these forms of evidence are very important. We think evidence syntheses are particularly important because they give you the best evidence globally, and you can combine that with local evidence at the municipal, state, or country level of these other types, like data analytics. This next slide, Exhibit 4.3, is about how in different steps of the decision-making process, we need different forms of evidence. And you'll see here that I've circled some of these questions because these are ones that the Brazilian team focused on in their review. So I thought they did a superb job of, for every intervention that they were looking at, looking to see what are the benefits, what are the harms, what is the cost effectiveness, might we adapt something that has been tried elsewhere, in which case we need to know how and why it worked, so we keep the essential parts, and then also different stakeholders' views and experiences. And again, to go back to my previous example from Canada, we may have existing qualitative studies that tell us how Black communities, Indigenous communities, or people who are homeless, how they may view vaccination and how they may view particular strategies to increase vaccine uptake. So again, the team did a superb job of answering the right types of questions about the type of step in the process they're looking at, which is which interventions should we use? So it's step 2, how do we select the right combination of interventions? This next slide, slide 4.5, is about distinguishing high from low quality evidence. So nowadays we have incredible amounts of evidence, and we have to zero in on the high quality evidence and distinguish it from the low quality evidence. And you can think about quality at the level of studies or syntheses or guidelines. You can think about quality at the level of the body of evidence on a topic, where it's more about how certain are we about the issue. You can think about quality being applied to recommendations that come out of guideline panels. In this case, because the team was producing a rapid evidence synthesis, they used the most widely accepted tool to assess the quality of the syntheses included in their rapid evidence synthesis, and that is AmStar. So again, big tick mark here, the team used the right tool to assess the quality of the reviews that were included in their rapid synthesis. So that's a quick run through. Hopefully my colleagues are not blushing too much from me commending their superb work. What I'll now talk about are some ways of thinking about in future how you could add even more value to an evidence document like this. So one way to do that is by incorporating equity considerations. So when we look at the evidence, we often look at it as a kind of the total evidence. And we don't say, do the findings vary for Black communities, for Indigenous communities, for people who are homeless and marginally housed? But when we look at evidence, that's a very helpful lens, because often our evidence findings vary according to different groups. A second way to think about enhancing the evidence document in future is to make it a living evidence product. So a living product is one that gets updated regularly. And this has probably been one of the most important innovations that has started to take off during this COVID period. We are seeing more and more living evidence documents. As one example, our team maintains a living evidence synthesis of vaccine effectiveness in the real world against variants. So initially for 16 weeks, we updated that every week because our government in Canada was so worried about whether the vaccines we were offering would work as new variants like Delta became available. More recently, we update it only every 2 weeks. So any new studies published in the previous 2 weeks are automatically assessed for quality, and the data are extracted, and the entire document is updated so that you know for any given combination of vaccine and variant whether the vaccine is likely to be effective, and if so, the scale of protection. So if Brazil is dramatically ramping up its efforts to improve vaccine confidence and uptake, you may want to maintain a living evidence document that gets updated periodically. So as the science changes, policymakers can rely on always being able to turn to the most recent, highest quality evidence on the topic. The other way that the document could be improved in future is by adding what we call a political and a systems analysis. So the political analysis helps you look for windows of opportunity to put particular interventions in place. So like all political environments, there are good and bad times for thinking about doing things differently. And the political analysis can help you understand when those more opportune times are coming available. The systems analysis is so you understand all the moving parts of your unified health system, who gets to make what decisions, how money flows, how the delivery of something like a vaccine program is organized, so that you can fine-tune how the evidence pertains to the exact features of the Brazilian system. So those two additional analyses often make it even more powerful to summarize the evidence, because you don't just have the evidence, but you have thought about how it would apply in the political context of Brazil and how it would apply to the Brazilian unified health system. So like last time, I'll show you a couple of slides from the Evidence Commission. Again, if you want to see them in more detail, just Google Evidence Commission and then just look up the exhibit number. So the first slide is about equity considerations. Equity is a theme that flows through the entire Evidence Commission report. So early on in the report, we introduce Progress Plus as one of the available frameworks to think about equity. So I gave the example of in Canada with vaccine confidence and uptake, our very significant worry about our Black communities, our Indigenous communities, and people who are homeless and marginally housed. So two of those groups, Black and Indigenous people, would fall under the R of progress. The housing is less explicitly covered here, but it probably is best covered under socioeconomic status. So there are many factors that may be important for a given issue. In Canada, for vaccine confidence and uptake, we were most worried about those three groups. So that was the equity lens that we brought to our review of the evidence. And it is the equity lens that is driving efforts to put in place interventions that increase vaccine confidence and uptake. We pick up equity at various stages in the report. And one of the ways that we pick it up, I'm delighted to say, is from one of our Brazilian commissioners, Ulysses Meno Abire, a colleague of ours who's doing his PhD at Fiocruz, Brasilia. He is writing for us an exhibit specifically focused on Indigenous rights and ways of knowing, which we think is critically important for all of us seeking to work with Indigenous peoples, to learn from them and also to work alongside them where they invite us in to help them to make decisions. So again, equity, absolutely essential. The authors of the report that I'm talking about for Brazil mention equity, but say in the very limited time, they weren't able to explicitly address this in all aspects of the report. So it's something to think about for the future. The next slide is about living evidence products. And again, this is the area where we have seen an explosion of activity during the COVID era. And I don't think this will stop. I think that in future, policymakers will again and again ask us to maintain living evidence products on high priority issues. In the Brazilian system, I would expect that vaccine confidence and uptake will remain so important an issue over the coming months and years that it would be worthwhile thinking about maintaining this document as a living evidence synthesis. You'll see some examples here under the evidence synthesis row. I mentioned our review, which is about vaccine effectiveness in the real world. COVID NMA has maintained a living evidence synthesis about all drug treatments for COVID-19. Every week, every single drug that can be used in the treatment of COVID-19 is looked at in terms of whether the evidence has changed about that drug treatment. And if it has, then the synthesis is updated. So that is probably one of the most remarkable feats that has been maintained during the COVID era, a living evidence synthesis of every drug treatment for COVID-19 updated every single week. The next example is drawn from the world of climate change. Our colleagues who work in that world use a different approach. They rely very heavily on modeling, but they also have living modeling work that gets updated regularly. The final example here is another COVID example, guidelines that are updated every 2 weeks, again for clinical care. So I know we're talking about vaccine confidence and uptake, but I'm pointing to these examples to say, if this really is a top issue for the Brazilian unified health system, you should be able to turn to a living evidence document that is updated regularly. So as the science changes, you can think about changing your approach. This next slide is about how critically important it is to combine local evidence with syntheses of the global evidence. So the Brazilian team in this instance, again, has done a superb job of synthesizing the global evidence. That's why there's a tick mark in that middle row. To make a difference in Brazil, you need to combine that with the best local evidence. Now, local, depending on where you work in the unified health system, may be national, it may be provincial or state, or it could be municipal. So if it's municipal, you would want local data analytics. If people have done any behavioral research in your community with different populations, you would want access to that. If people have done any qualitative research from your municipality or other municipalities like yours, you would want access to that. If people have tried any of the interventions talked about in the report in your community or in other communities like yours, you would want those local evaluations. So evidence-informed policymaking to me means using the best local evidence from the municipal, state, or national level, depending on where you're working, coupled with these syntheses of the best evidence globally. So it's that combination that is very important. The other piece that I have on the right side is that point that I mentioned before about how certain types of analyses can complement an evidence synthesis. So the team has already essentially done a policy analysis because they have looked at the problem, they have looked at options for addressing the problem, and they have noted some implementation considerations. So that's what I would call policy analysis. What isn't currently in the document is that political analysis and the systems analysis that I talked about before. The political analysis so that you're paying attention to what's happening on the politics side, looking for opportunities to bring evidence-based interventions into play. Systems analysis is thinking, okay, these interventions may work in general, but how would we put them into place given the specifics of who makes what decisions in our health system, given how money flows in the system, given how we're currently organized to deliver vaccinations and to provide other supports for people who we may be wanting to vaccinate. So that can powerfully complement the available evidence. So those are some thoughts about further enhancements to the evidence document. But keep in mind that I said it's a superb document as it is, unbelievable effort in only 30 days. These additional steps are things that you may want to consider in future if you have more time. So now I'll just talk about some additional next steps. And for me, the obvious next step would be to say, great, we have the best evidence, but what do everyday Brazilians think? And what do the different players who are likely going to be involved in vaccine uptake efforts, what do they think about this issue? And we don't just care what they think about the evidence, but what do they think about all the other drivers of what will determine whether you make a big difference in vaccine confidence and uptake? And that includes political considerations, and that includes many things like misinformation or disinformation campaigns, which are running rampant in many countries right now related to vaccines. But it includes many other factors. So stakeholder dialogues are something, or deliberative dialogues are something that we've now been running for, I guess, around 12 years. And to us, it's an incredibly powerful tool. We send out about 10 days before the dialogue an evidence brief that looks very similar to the rapid synthesis that the team has prepared. It works through the problem and its causes, so the issue of low vaccine confidence and uptake and what we think might be driving that. It works through what the evidence is about different options for addressing it. And then it works through potential implementation considerations. On the day of the dialogue, we bring together usually around 20 to 25 people. Some may be leaders from the municipal or state government. Some may be organizational leaders in the health system. Some may be frontline doctors and nurses. All of them are people who will bring unique perspectives to the table, but also they're the types of people who will, having participated in the dialogue, return to their home organization or community and push for the types of changes that they think will make a difference. It's a day-long dialogue, and the conversation maps onto the structure of the evidence brief. So we talk about the problem and its causes, we talk about the options, we talk about implementation, but then the difference is we also talk about next steps for different constituencies. What does the municipal secretary need to think about doing? What do the clinic leaders need to think about doing? What does the medical association need to think about doing? So it brings the actions home for people in a very concrete way, informed by the evidence, but also informed by these bigger political and system considerations. So stakeholder dialogue, something we've done now for 12 years or so. What is newer for us are citizen panels. So we always invited everyday people to come to our stakeholder dialogues, but they tended to be individuals who had a lot of experience in going to meetings and bringing citizen inputs to the table. So another way of saying it, they were often more civil society leaders than actual everyday citizens. So now we organize these citizen panels that bring together diverse groups of citizens. They may be patients with lived experience. They may be parents of kids who are considering vaccination, a variety of ways that we define who we bring to the table, but it's always driven by two considerations. One is they will bring unique insights to the issue. So for vaccine confidence and uptake, people who are very pro-vaccine, people who are on the fence about it, people who may have had an adverse event related to it, but we're trying to get diversity in the experiences related to the issue. But the other way that we're trying to get diversity is from an equity perspective. So we want people from an array of socioeconomic classes. We want different genders represented, many different roles in society represented. So it's meant to give us a window onto how diverse citizens view the problem and think about the solution. And we've had a number of tremendous successes with this. And now it's rare that we don't first do many citizen panels and then bring those insights into the evidence brief along with the evidence and then have the stakeholder dialogue. And often this leads directly to policy change because the policymakers get the best evidence. They get evidence-informed insights from citizens and from stakeholders, and they hear in very practical terms about all the issues they need to think about in order to take action. So it combines best evidence with all these other factors to help to drive change. So that's a little bit about our stakeholder dialogues and citizen panels, but I have, again, a few slides. So returning to exhibit 5.3, I'm now talking about that final row. So the second to last row is the rapid synthesis that's already been done. But what could come in future would be convening some of these deliberative dialogues. And that could mean both citizen panels as well as stakeholder dialogues to put the evidence alongside all of these other considerations. So something to think about in terms of next steps. So now if I start to think about other things that could be different in the future, in addition to this very particular topic about vaccine confidence and uptake, the Evidence Commission will be making a number of recommendations. Currently, the number sits at 23. We'll be having our final meeting with the commissioners about the recommendations next Friday, so the number may change. Some of those recommendations are currently directed at government policymakers, like municipal health secretaries. And so those recommendations call for appropriate structures and processes, or what we might call an evidence support system. So can those municipal secretaries rely on a system around them to bring them the best evidence when they need it? Can they turn to staff who know how to find and use evidence and have the available infrastructure to give them the evidence they need when they need it? Do they have government science advisors who can bring best evidence to the table and advisory bodies who can bring best evidence to the table? And I have a few slides just to expand on this. So I think I'll go over this one just very briefly. But this slide is about some of the structures that provide a way in for evidence and some of the processes that provide a way in for evidence. So many governments are setting up things like a coordination unit that intersects with different groups in government, but also outside government, to make sure that evidence is flowing into government in a way that can inform decision making. But there are also, if I move to the last row, there are also things like budgeting, planning, monitoring processes that happen every day that may currently have no connection to evidence, but they are a very powerful way in for evidence if there are committed municipal, state, and national policymakers committed to using evidence in those types of processes. So there's both the structures you can put in place, but there's also processes that you can adapt to make sure evidence is a part of the day-to-day work of government. This slide is a little bit complicated, but think about your municipal health secretary and the municipal government over on the right-hand side. So you have people like the municipal health secretary, who's a user of evidence. They would interact with a variety of people who would be intermediaries between the world of decision-making and the world of evidence. And then you would have people in the university who are more on the production side. But what we're most interested in are those points of overlap. So the government advisory bodies, the government science advisors, the government decision support, any of those groups that are about getting information into decision making are a powerful way in for research evidence. So that's the green box on the right. Moving to the more yellow box off to the left, there are also groups that act full time as intermediaries. So Ulysses is often known globally as the father of EVIPNet, evidence-informed policy networks. We now have them in more than 50 countries. These entities act as intermediaries between the world of evidence and the world of decision-making. But local communities, states, countries often have them, they may just be known by different things. And then finally, sometimes there are evidence producers who, in addition to doing the usual peer-reviewed publications, also try to support the use of evidence in decision-making. So imagine that in a municipality, you're trying to make use of everything you have available, but you also need to be drawing on insights coming from the global level or from the national and state level. So you have the World Health Organization producing norms and standards. You have the World Health Organization country office or regional office, so the Pan American Health Organization providing technical assistance. And you have groups like Cochrane and others producing global public goods that can then be used by these platforms. So not only do municipal governments need to think about what they have locally, but they also need to make sure they're making the most of these connections to levels above them, because those groups may be doing things that they can use directly in their work. This slide is meant to make 2 points. On the left side, the point is, during the COVID era, our experience and the experience of people in many different countries is that things other than best evidence were more typically encountered by COVID-19 decision makers. We saw a lot of focus on preprints and single studies, a lot of focus on expert opinion that was not linked to the best evidence, a lot of expert panels being brought together, often not supported with the best evidence, and a lot of countries looking around saying, oh, Chile is doing this, Argentina is doing this, without saying, but have Chile and Argentina actually evaluated what they've done? So we need to get better at understanding the risks of these other things and trying to get more out of them. But the best situation would be to focus on these forms of best evidence. But even here on the right-hand side, some forms of evidence were more typically encountered during COVID-19 than others. So again, our experience and the experience of colleagues in many countries is data analytics, modeling, and evaluation studies got a huge amount of attention. And we saw much less attention being given to behavioral research, qualitative insights, evidence syntheses, and robustly developed guidelines. So we need to get that balance right. We need many forms of evidence in making decisions. This slide is, I apologize, even more complicated, but my main message about this one is on the left-hand side where there's much less text. The research system in countries like Brazil, it largely operates very well. Lots of high quality research being done by curiosity-driven researchers and so on. Over the last decade or two, we've seen a lot of work focused on the evidence implementation system. How do we synthesize the evidence, develop guidelines, and use it to try to drive changes among health providers like doctors and among citizens or patients? The piece that is new, albeit the piece that Ulysses has been pushing for about 15 years, the role played by EVIPNet and other units like that, is to support decision-making. It's that evidence support system. And during COVID-19, we've often seen this having to happen in hours and days. So we were producing evidence syntheses in 4 hours and 1 day and 2 days because decision-making was moving so fast. So that's what we mean by an evidence support system. So we need a healthy research system. We need a healthy implementation system, but we also need this much more dynamic, demand-driven evidence support system. So this is my final slide. So this is my my bold, you didn't ask me for this, but I thought I would just reflect on it. Wouldn't it be amazing if CONASEMS took it on to think about developing fit for purpose government structures and processes, thought about what would the ideal decision support staff and infrastructure look like, thought about really getting the right types of government science advisors, and set up really good advisory bodies to support evidence use. And then wouldn't it also be great if they formalized a relationship with a network of universities and think tanks that can contribute to the evidence support system? It would not, no, only the biggest municipal governments would ever be able to have their own evidence support system. Most of them are going to be dependent on a network of other organizations that can respond to their needs. And that's where the network could come in. What kind of work could the network do? Well, all of those strategies that I talked about before that evidence intermediaries use. So if I give us as one example at the McMaster Health Forum, we use 5 strategies and the network could adopt any or all of these. We run training programs for government in how to use evidence. We maintain 2 one-stop shops for evidence syntheses. One, all the evidence syntheses in the world about how to strengthen health systems and get the right programs, services, and products to people. And the other focused on social systems, so outside health. 3, we prepare rapid evidence syntheses, just like the ones that I've been talking about today. 4th, we convene stakeholder dialogues and citizen panels. And the most recent thing we do is we have a stable of 5 coaches that work directly with people in the health system to support on-the-ground implementation. So those are some strategies that we use at the forum. For the last 20 months at COVIDend, the COVID-19 Evidence Network to support decision-making, we do 4 things. One is we bring together horizon scanning panels to identify emergent issues. So right now, big focus on immunizing kids. So what will be the issues involved in getting parents to accept vaccination for COVID-19 for their kids aged 5 to 11? That's an emergent issue that we need to be preparing now with the best evidence. Second, we prepare rapid and living evidence syntheses. So we've produced 86 documents in the last 11 months, some of which are living reviews like the one I mentioned. Third, we maintain a one-stop shop of best evidence syntheses about COVID-19. So we're now up to more than 11,000 syntheses about COVID-19, covering public health measures, clinical management, health system arrangements, and economic and social response. But we also provide a coordination function. So we coordinate demand. So we have questions coming in from across the country, and we bring them in through a single entry mechanism. And then we coordinate the response. So we have 40 evidence synthesis teams across the country. And for any question, we try and find the right team who can deliver the product on the very short time frame that it's required on. So again, some examples of what this network could do if there was interest. The other piece of what the network would need to do is maintain strong connections to global, regional, and national groups. Lots of great work being done around the globe, in the Americas, throughout Brazil. This network, if it were to come into existence, would need to be well connected. So you bring those best products to bear for your particular context. So those are just some thoughts about next steps. They may or may not be right for where you are politically right now, for where the health system is, but do think about not just how do we improve vaccine confidence and uptake, but how do we build a better evidence support system for municipal governments in Brazil, but also at the state and at the national level. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll see if there's any questions that have come in. And let me just check after all that. Ulysses, you're still there. I didn't lose you after all that time.
John, this is a brilliant presentation. I think you covered so much ground, but so in such an integrated form, and it makes so much sense for us at this moment. This morning, I was chatting briefly with you before the presentation. This morning we had a fantastic. Really fantastic meeting in the format of a talk show organized by the city, by the Department of Science and Technology of the Ministry of Health. And in this, we looked exactly at some basic competencies required for people, for this diversified portfolio. I even used the taxonomy you propose for participants and all that. It was very helpful. So this is to say that part of what you mentioned about this evidence ecosystem that is needed is there already. But what is lacking is exactly is strengthening the network of universities and think tanks and research centers. In relation to this, I think CONASENS, and you got right in I don't know why I'm still surprised, John, how you come from Canada, you know about Brazil, but you jump right into the main issues. I think CONASENS has a fantastic opportunity exactly to bring this together and to operate in a more daily basis with evidence-informed policymaking. So I think NESCOM is very well positioned as well to articulate this network, to help articulate this network, because it has experience on this. Yesterday, we had the launching of a meeting of a huge network of universities that form the Open University of the Unified Health System, the UNASUS, as well, which is another model. So I'm kind of beating around the bush here, but one thing called my attention that I think also that CONASENS is very well positioned, which is when you mention the need to expand the political analysis. So if you could expand a little bit more about that, because that's what they do by profession, right? These are very, um, very experienced policymakers that deal with, in Brazil, it's the same word as you know for policies and politics. So, but that's what they do constantly, daily, and they are in contact with citizens in several ways. So one thing that I think would be helpful for us to think in terms of CONASENS is to include the municipal health councils that are elected exactly to advise from the citizens' perspective. So if you could expand a little bit more how you suggest this political analysis is done in a more uh, integrated way, in a more uh, sustainable way.
Well, I think that, obviously municipal policymakers know how to navigate politics. So that's their job, as you indicated. But we have found that the people around them, we call them public servants, the people reporting to politicians, they need to have very systematic approaches to thinking through the politics of situations. But I'm talking also about how people who are involved in getting the right evidence to the right people at the right time, we need to have very strong political analysis skills, almost as good as those people working directly with politicians. Because I can look at the superb rapid evidence synthesis, and I don't know enough about the current politics in Brazil, but I would anticipate that a bunch of those are not the right solutions for Brazil at this particular moment in time, whereas others politically I could imagine would be a good match, but I might talk about some of them in slightly different ways because they're more likely to resonate with the political context. So I think it's that ability of evidence producers and evidence intermediaries to have that ability to understand the politics and talk about the evidence in ways that fit within that politics, or to know that you're taking it on, in a very distinct way if you're going to try and go against what those politics are. But I feel like it's a core skill set of those of us trying to get evidence into policymaking is being able to do political analysis work. We often say, if you want to work with us, you need 5 skills. You need evidence synthesis, stakeholder engagement, and then those 3 types of analysis. And the political one is because we need to be able to interact with politicians in language they understand and bring evidence into that conversation in ways that they can see the connection to the politics that they're dealing with. So that's what I mean by the political analysis piece.
Very good. Excellent. Well, I'm sure both Roberta Crevelario and Bruna Araújo and Francisco Campos are really wanting to jump in and participate. So Francisco raised his hands.
I'd like to thank very much John by the impressive knowledge about Brazil and the CONASEMs, and I think that I'm quite impressed about the quality of your propositions. And I think that's more important than ever in Brazil right now, reflecting about these evidence-informed policies, because we have been exposed over the last 6 months to a parliamentary commission in the Senate in Brazil, where it's quite common to discuss about evidence. And I think evidence is not a language that people in their televisions use to hear about it. So it's the pyramids, etc. It's right now. I think it's part of the communication in Brazil. What's the reason based in which you take a decision, for instance, for medicine or vaccination, etc. And I think it's important that it was common to hear in this commission that I treated 30 patients, and because of this, I'm absolutely sure that this drug works, or I took myself a pill, and because I'm an authority in the country, I am well. I did well. And because of this, I recommend this pill to everyone to take. So we have been used to those concepts. Not just as scientists, not just as teachers or professors or health professionals, but I think that the Brazilian population has been exposed to this, to those concepts over the last 6 months. And because of this, I thank you very much for your presentation. And I think that, for instance, we are at the same time that we are sad about the course that the pandemic took in Brazil. We are so happy because yesterday it was the first day in 2 years where there is no a single death in 6 states in Brazil. So this proves that when we talk about the science, we proposed vaccines, we proposed that we must have evidences in order to draw policies. We are not the crazy ones. We are the correct ones. And I think that this kind of advising is so important. And I think that at this time the municipalities have a great role in drawing the solutions and in pushing forward the policies, because we cannot expect very much from authorities that think that because I took a pill and I'm not ill, it's a good evidence that it works. So thank you very much for your presentation, and I think that Ulysses Sábado Girardi for the invitation as well.
Francisco, I'm so glad you said that. I feel like this is, in the 25 years I've been working in this area, I feel like this is our best chance to really build a better evidence support system for our countries. I feel like that's the case in Canada, and I'm so excited to hear you say now might be the time to move in Brazil, given the events of the last 6 months. So that's music to my ears. I think we're hearing that from many countries, that we've been through a very difficult time. Many things went badly, some things went well, and now the assessment of that is bringing to the fore opportunities to do better. So I think we really need to focus in the next 6 or 12 months to really building an evidence support system that helps policymakers to make better decisions.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Ulysses, I think you're on mute.
So Bruno and Roberta would like to jump in. These are the two,
the authors of the famous report.
So I'm sure they have some observations and questions.
Eu vou fazer a pergunta em português mesmo e o Ulisses, se puder, traduz, por favor. Primeiro, antes de tudo, eu gostaria de agradecer muito ao John por ter revisado o nosso trabalho. É simplesmente uma honra, principalmente porque a gente trabalha muito com as ferramentas suporte e ter alguém que, de fato, como você e o Ulisses, que trabalham com isso, é extraordinário. Juntando com a experiência de vocês, é fenomenal. Você trouxe muito...
Just for me to be able to translate, John, and I'm sure he got the energy out of it and maybe some words, but Roberta is mentioning that it's a fantastic opportunity for them, because they use the support tools, they used the evolution of the support tools, and she's very grateful to have this opportunity, and she thanks you for this fantastic review that you did.
Sim, obrigada, Ulisses. A gente realmente concorda com todas as colocações, realmente precisa ser um trabalho que continue e seja desenvolvido com maior detalhe, principalmente na equidade em relação à implementação também das opções. Você trouxe um pouco sobre a discussão da síntese de evidência viva, e eu gostaria de saber um pouco de quanto tempo a gente pode atualizar essa síntese de evidências viva, considerando que normalmente a gente não tem tantos recursos e existem outros problemas que precisam de opções para enfrentamento deles, e às vezes a gente precisa deslocar um pouco a atenção para outras prioridades.
Yes, basically, John, she mentions about the challenges of continuity, and also that she received the message about equity. I just will make a parenthesis in the translation here, because they asked me in terms of, should we sacrifice this? And my passion for, my fight for equity in health in the society. So it was a tough choice, but we had to do it because of the time. So, we will probably focus this on the next step. And she wants to understand a little bit more about the living synthesis, how what is the periodicity of updating and all that, and she mentions that we don't have resources usually to keep on doing this, and there are so many problems. You mentioned that 85 that you did only this year, and this for us is a huge number because of the limited resources. So she would like some advice about that.
Great. So first, when I made the comment about equity, I was saying I can't believe how much work you did in only 30 days. So I'm not surprised that you couldn't do everything. And it's really, if you had the resources to do more, it sounds like you would agree equity would be a really important piece to add. With living evidence syntheses, we do face this big challenge of how do we fund what I consider to be these global public goods. So right now, we have a situation where for COVID, all around the globe, every country, many states and provinces, everybody is doing their own rapid syntheses instead of having a couple of groups that are supported to maintain a living evidence synthesis that is available to all of us. And if that was the case, there will be some topics where Brazilians lead and maintain the living evidence syntheses, and then others where Brazilians focus on contextualizing those to the Brazilian context. That's how the world should work, and we're really committed with the Evidence Commission to spend the next 6 to 12 months to convince people that that is the model that we need to work through. But even if that doesn't happen, I think we have to find ways to maintain these reviews. And what many of us find is once you have set up the searches and you've got the document structured and so on, the cost of maintaining it is relatively low because you're no longer searching everything. You're only searching the last 2 weeks or the last 4 weeks. And you have teams that are very experienced. And some studies, immediately they're not high enough quality to be added. So there are a variety of ways that once you set up the infrastructure, the ongoing costs can be relatively small. And I think that they're much smaller than what's happening now, which is we do it and then 8 months later, somebody wants a new one and a group starts from scratch and does the whole thing again. So in the long run, we will spend less and have better products if we maintain these over long periods of time. But it is a funding concern. And I think every country in the world is struggling with this, and we need to help to solve the problem by getting countries to come together to pool resources in order that the right teams maintain the living syntheses. So no easy solutions, but my hope is we start to see more living evidence syntheses coming from Brazil, and that Brazilian research funders will start to invest in these critically important products.
Yes. Bruna, would you like to make a question?
Eu só queria também reiterar o que a Roberta disse, do agradecimento sobre poder ter revisado o nosso projeto. E em relação ao síntese vivas, que você estava comentando, dessa periodicidade que realmente vai diminuir o trabalho, porque você vai encontrando menos evidências, e a questão da implementação e da equidade nesse processo. Quando que a gente teria que revisar isso novamente? Quando que elas seriam mudadas? Porque vai mudando, né? Todo mundo é vivo, a população também. Então, como que a gente entraria nessas questões também dentro dessas síntese vivas?
Basically, Bruna is asking, first, she also expresses her gratitude, and at the same time, in relation to the living synthesis, in terms of the implementation concerns and the equity issues, how would you suggest, because she says, well, reality is really dynamic, of course, and even in equity, there are variations. For instance, Brazil, and I'm adding this, Brazil is going through a process of impoverishment that is extreme at this point, and probably all over the world, and hunger is growing up and all that. So in terms of equity and implementation, would you have some specific suggestions?
So great questions. The equity piece is really tough. I think how we tend to see people address it is they say we can't do everything. So what are likely to be long-term equity priorities that we will keep for a fairly long period of time? So I mentioned the examples in Canada, and now, 9 months later, they still remain the three groups we worry about the most. So Black and other racialized communities, Indigenous peoples, and those who are homeless and precariously housed. So there are obviously other equity deserving groups, but those are ones that we have historically been the most worried about. So they were prioritized as for the equity lens. It is possible for another group to come along with all the studies sitting there. We have all the data extracted. They could relatively easily add one or two additional equity groups and produce new publications focused on that. But for continuity, it is good if you can pick some priority groups to focus on. And then the other question had to do with implementation. Again, a great question, because in the living evidence syntheses that I know about, the focus tends to be on a single question. So it might be more, what are the benefits and harms, or what are people's views and experiences, not all of the questions, and certainly not implementation. So what that means is the living evidence synthesis addresses, a central question, but you still need to do the local work when the window of opportunity comes to think about implementation. So in 8 months, you may only do the implementation workup once, whereas you're updating the living evidence synthesis about benefits and harms every week or every 2 weeks over all 8 months. So some things get updated all the time. Other things are only done when they're absolutely needed, like implementation considerations.
Very good. We have here from the audience, John, a question from Daisy, who has been working with this whole dialogue processes. And she asks, what should be the main strategy for facing possible resistance by decision makers to use of evidence synthesis, which is a tough question, I know.
Yeah.
And Francisco touched on the subject as well in his comments. So
yeah. It's so hard to know. I guess I've started recently just to put in front of people an example. So the example that I tend to use the most right now is our vaccine effectiveness against variants, because we've maintained this now for a very long period of time. And a while back, a policymaker from the United Arab Emirates wrote to us and said, I love the idea of this document, but the minister just wants one page. Like, I want all of this in one page. And so we started producing what we call the visual summary. And the visual summary looks at all the major outcomes. So infection, transmission, mortality. And then within each of those, it looks at each of the vaccines. And then the column headers are the variants. And then we use color coding to tell you whether there's high certainty evidence, moderate certainty evidence, low certainty evidence. So if you're sitting in Canada and we only have 2 approved vaccines and we're really worried about Delta, you can go right to those cells and say, oh, okay, I shouldn't be too worried about mortality or something else, but I need to still be worried about transmission. As soon as you put that in front of people, they think, oh my gosh, like every day I read a newspaper and there's another new study, but this is pulling it all together in one place, only focusing on the high quality studies, using colors to help me understand how much confidence I can place in the results. It gives me everything I need. So if I open the newspaper, I don't have to worry about the latest preprint, or if a researcher sends me their study, I don't need to worry about it, because this is the one place that has every study in the world that is of high quality, with the data extracted, presented in a common format, and in a way that I can grasp in one page. So my experience is, when we can show people the incredible value and how it can stop them from having to worry about all these other things, they're much more likely to use it. So all of that said, of course, if you have politicians who do not believe in evidence and are pursuing nefarious goals, trying to do other things, and delegitimize institutions and delegitimize science, then you have your work cut out for you. But I'd like to think that most policymakers they know they're trying to make difficult decisions, they're trying to be informed, they're trying to meet the needs of their constituents. So if you can show that you can help them you can make their life easier because you're bringing it all together in one place and helping them have more confidence in their decisions, then a lot of them will be convinced and will start to welcome you into their work.
Very good. I think this really wraps up well. Just a very quick comment about that, John. One issue that I think touches, of course, there is the whole concern of the policymakers for the well-being of the population. That's the main issue. But one argument that really helped many times was the avoidance of judicialization, which in Brazil occurs a lot, especially after the Parliamentary Inquiry Commission. This became also, the policymakers are being prosecuted for the very bad job they did. So, if they had used the best available evidence and acted on it, we would have at least, the research shows that we would have at least less 300,000 people dead. So, that's the magnitude. And I think, as Francisco mentioned, and you also, I think we have a golden opportunity now, even amidst the whole tragedy, of showing, it's a window and it shuts quickly because,
absolutely,
people forget. It's going to be hard to forget 610,000 people dead, but at least the urgency may close the window. So
I really do feel, as I said before, this is our best chance in 25 years, and if we don't act fast, the wrong lessons may be drawn, or the right lessons may be drawn, but we don't push for it and we don't make sure that we have evidence support systems that meet our needs. So we really have to be pushing right now, because where everybody is really exhausted by COVID. You've gone through this very emotional commission in the last 6 months. You can't sustain that kind of focus for another 6 or 12 months. So we really need to be moving now to say, okay, we learned a lot of lessons. Now let's move with the things that went well, and let's put in place mechanisms so that never happens again. And as a country, we're much better positioned, whether it's another pandemic or another health emergency, or any societal challenge. The next time it could be antimicrobial resistance. It could be any number of other challenges. As societies, we need to put in place the mechanisms now so we're better able to make decisions in the future, build on what went well, and address the many things that didn't.
Excellent, John. I think we will have to close up now, but again, I couldn't express more our collective gratitude, personally, of course, but all of us benefited a lot. The way this is going to continue until late in the year, the discussions will continue in several formats with policy dialogues. We are going to organize a policy dialogue with this document a bit expanded, and incorporating your comments and fantastic contributions, and also this the video of this presentation will be available to all the participants in all the dialogues and to all the policymakers that want to access. So it was a precious opportunity. Thank you so much. I know you are in some of the busiest months for you. I know that. So, we really thank you for taking this time and contributing so much for us.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Congratulations again on the great work. And I hope in 2022, I will see at least some of you in person.
Yes.
It would be lovely to see you again and to have a chance to meet Bruna, Roberta, and others. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye then, John.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.